Can you work yourself into loving yourself?
I want to work out to empower and get strong. I don't want to work out to punish myself. That has changed the physical aspect of how I train. The lens in which I look at training had to change. You just want to continue to feed that beast as much as you can. Developing a healthy relationship with that is difficult.
Thomas DeLauer. Do you ever go by Tom?
Not on purpose.
Tom DeLauer. I've never heard that.
Yeah, no, it sounds kind of weird. I don't care if someone does. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. But it's just like I don't feel like I look like a Tom. Like,
yeah. I get that. You got peeping Tom. There's some sour connotations. You don't want to be involved in that. Thomas straight shooter. I trusted Thomas. Something you and I share. I experience quite a bit of what I think I would probably call, I don't know if it would be like diagnosis that, but body dysmorphia growing up. And that was something that I was super scrawny, skinny, awkward, kind of like baby giraffe, deranged kind of appendages moving about. I was kind of like one of those, the car wash guys, the wiggly wackly squiggly guys. I was like that, crooked teeth, bowl cut, poorly cut, a little awkward sideways. My mom did it, bless her heart. And then I discovered obsessing over bodybuilding, and puberty often or also arose at the similar time. Put on like a ton of muscle, like 60 pounds of muscle in a short amount of time. And then had this armor, this like suit of physical armor around myself that was covering up a deep feeling of insecurity and like unsafety ultimately. And then I became obsessed with getting as big as I possibly could to kind of cover up ultimately what were sensations of insecurity. And something that I would do if there was ever like a picture that was potentially being taken or anything of the sort, before the picture would be taken, I would have to leave the room. I would run out. I would do a bunch of push-ups. I would do a bunch of pull-ups just to be able to get like a little bit of a pump. And then I would come back and like permit for the picture to be taken. So I don't know if that's body dysmorphia. But very insecure and guarding a lot of that insecurity with physicality. What is your experience with that as a pretty well like perma-jacked dude on the internet?
Perma-jacked.
You're perma-jacked, bro.
An issue.
Why are you so perma-jacked, bro?
I love it. I like that, dude. That's a good. I would say that having an audience has made it in the past has made it significantly worse, because then not only are you seeing what you see in the mirror and covering up your own insecurities, but then you're also, now I'm getting this external validation for it too, and then you're also getting financial compensation for it. You have all these external factors that have now helped reaffirm that this is what you're supposed to be, and this is. So then the fear of losing it ends up becoming a problem. It's less about like, I think now having an audience, I'm like, if anything, it's dulled down the need for me to like have a pump and look a certain way in public, but it's reinforced this fear that if I lose this, am I even worthy of love? Right? Like, so it's, that's the bigger thing. So that's like body dysmorphia on steroids, no pun intended, right? Because now you're trapped. As a kid, I was super skinny too. I was like the long distance runner kid, and I started playing rugby because like it was a sport that I could play. I wasn't really big enough for football, but I could play winger in rugby. But I started getting like hurt all the time because I was just like small, and when I was taking these hits, so similar thing, put on a bunch of muscle as much as I could. And that served me well like through my teen years, but then like I ended up very overweight, and that's kind of, a lot of people know that whole story. I mean, don't need to go into that, but the point is like I even recognize that becoming really overweight at a point in time was almost like this knee-jerk like reflex of being the skinny, like beat up person. I wasn't literally beat up, but like felt like I was emotionally beat up because I just internalized it that way. So it's a daily struggle. It's a real struggle.
The reason a lot of people work out is because they don't really like themselves. They look in the mirror. They don't like the reflection that they see looking back, I would imagine. And there's, comes from like a core of like, perhaps for many people, like I don't like myself, and I'm going to maybe work out and I'm going to have a six pack or whatever it is that I desire to see reflecting back at me. And then I will love myself. I'll have a better relationship with myself. I think part of that is true, that you can cultivate a healthier, more balanced um, relationship with yourself through engaging with your body. And then also there's probably other aspects that aren't really quite getting scratched in that process that will probably still be looming in the background. What are your thoughts? Can you work yourself out into loving yourself?
I recently had an experience, and this particular one was with some. This particular one was a ketamine assisted therapy, where I had enough of a disassociation to actually see myself almost as though it was like a drone aerial video of myself going into my own personal gym, my studio here in California. And it was me going in there day in and day out. And it was happening very fast. Like it was almost like a time lapse movie, like, oh, day, night, day, night. And I was going in there and going into the gym, and I wasn't working out. I was just kind of punishing myself. I was just in there like, and I'm just like seeing this. I'm like, is this what other people see? And I'm thinking, like, is this what other people see of me? Like when they're like oh, poor Thomas, like he's just in there just by himself, just beating himself up. And I'm like, every morning at 5 a.m., I just go in here and beat myself up. And I actually came out of that with a different perspective of like, wow, I want to work out to like empower and get strong. I don't want to work out to like punish myself. Like, what have I been doing? And
Wow.
that has changed like the physical aspect of how I train. Like, I feel like I have a better um, idea of like my gauge now. Like when I need to not overtrain, I have a better idea of like when I'm okay with just being like, that's enough for today. Like, and just stopping when it feels like time to stop, like my own internal kind of barometer there. So to answer your question, it's like I feel like the lens in which I look at training had to change, and this is all very very recent. Because uh, you just want to continue to feed that beast as much as you can, and that so developing a healthy relationship with that is difficult. It's definitely not easy.
I recently got into, I'm becoming obsessed with dance again. I'm going through different iterations of that. So I'm really into Zouk dancing right now, which is kind of like this sensual Brazilian style of partner dance. And a part of the Zouk dancing is it's kind of almost like you do like contact improvisation type things. And there's a lot of like body rolls and a lot of like hip rolls and shoulder isolations and different things. And it brought awareness of different aspects in myself and my spine and my ribs that are kind of like a little more tight, almost like frozen. And I'm like, oh my god, it's so important that I can open these spaces up so that I'm able to connect with a partner and be able to like dance in a better way. And I've noticed when I go to the gym now, just after being interested in this for the last couple of weeks, I noticed my training has a lot more like life or like vivacity. It's like this, like there's like this like life force that's coming through it because I'm interested in training for the purpose of connection and for the purpose of like joy. And I'm like putting music on and I'm like moving myself and I'm like becoming that guy that you or girl wearing spandex at the gym that's like dancing like nobody's watching. And I'm like, that's the shit. Like, I didn't think I wanted to be that guy,
No, man,
but like, there's something special there.
there is something there.
And being able to integrate that also with hypertrophy training and also with powerlifting and Olympic lifting and the other modalities which are so beautiful.
Yeah.
But I've just personally noticed having that little spark of training, not just for the sake of I just need to get bigger for bigger sake, or I need to I won't love myself unless I'm sore all day long, but actually just for the sake of like I don't know, passion.
Yeah.
How like invoking that into training, I think is incredibly powerful.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So is that something that, like, what do you do with that? Having the realization that perhaps for a good chunk of my time, I've been training in a way that has been like punishment. And how common do you think that is for people?
I think it's extremely, extremely common. I would imagine that a lot of people go through their entire life like never really seeing it, because we're a reactive society to begin with, and it's a very reactive. Like the fact that Like if you just look at us compared to other regions of the world, the US compared to even say like Europe, it's just like exercise is almost artificial here, right? It's like we it's like I've always thought that exercise should be a stimulus, but now I feel like the magic happens in life. The exercise is just the stimulus, right? The exercise is the catalyst for life to do the rest. So like do some hard things to make life pave the way for you properly. I think we have it totally bass backwards a lot of times, where we feel like exercise is like a reactive component to counter our lifestyle. And I'm like, that just seems so wrong. Like, right? Like, shouldn't it be cohesive? Like, shouldn't exercise enhance your lifestyle? Shouldn't exercise enhance your life? Doesn't it like, isn't it new level unlocked because you can exercise? Like you exercise, you do something, now you're physically capable, new level unlocked. So now you can achieve a new level of spiritual enlightenment, because now you could achieve something you couldn't achieve before. Now I can climb the mountain I couldn't climb before, and I can get the peace and serenity and the solitude that I couldn't get before. Like you take someone that's maybe a relatively maybe unhealthy, obese person that can't go hike into the woods. Like if they use exercise as a tool to enhance their life so that now they can get into a different area and actually find like a peace and tranquility they didn't have in their life before, like that's like a good example of like what exercise needs to be. It's like, how do you unlock a new level of your life? And like for you, it's dance. Like now you're able to use exercise to enhance this other avenue of your life that's making you really, really happy and connected. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, most of the time exercise has been an encumbrance to my happiness.
I think it's probably a lot of the dissatisfaction that people experience in general would be just a lack of inspiring purpose. If you have an inspired purpose, something that like genuinely lights you up, it's not something that's it's someone else's ideal for you that like you think you should do because it'll make you money or because it'll make somebody else proud or whatever it is, but something that you, and that for like the metaphor could be dance. Like it's just like it just feels good, you know. So I just like that. It feels good. I want to go in that path. I feel like finding a core of that and building one's training around that, I would imagine would remove a lot of the kind of like contracted sensations that one might have around the idea of training.
That's a really good perspective on it, because I feel like in today's society we don't see it quite that way. We don't see it. We've been conditioned to believe that exercise is like a sliver of the day that you have to give away. Like it's a burden, and dues paid, right? Like it's just like like even the language surrounding it is awkward. um, so it's like, why would anybody have any, even things that they do want to have a purpose with, or they do feel sincerely fulfilled by, or their mission and purpose that they think they are chasing at a certain point in time is usually fed to them in a different way. It's not really what they're after internally. It's what they think other people want. And that's, of course, that's going to create this distorted illusion in everything when you start looking at how they exercise and whatnot.
How is your perspective on fitness, training, exercise, the whole industry, your relationship within your, your own practice? How has that shifted over the years, and what are some top things or a top thing that you used to believe emphatically that now you don't find to be true?
This isn't going to sound super concrete, but it is. It is like, because I just feel it wholeheartedly. I used to really think that the mathematical side of things, when it came down to nutrition, mattered.
Thermodynamics.
Yeah, like I really like, and even as a person that was in the low carb space, I was probably more on the fringe of it than most of the nutrition community, right? Because like there is obviously the lipid energy model, and I never fully bought into that, but I also like I probably subscribed more to understanding thermodynamics just made sense. And without getting into the weeds of it, like I now feel the energetic value of food is significantly more important. And it's like we have a mutual friend, Laird, obviously, Laird Hamilton, and he and I were just having a heyday talking about this, just because there's foods that you can feel just do something for you, and there's foods that you can feel are an encumbrance to like how you think, move, and feel. And I feel like that's probably one of the biggest things I've really made a shift on. And to a certain degree, it can be chalked up to like bioindividuality. Like I'm sure genetically, epigenetically, digestively, there are foods that agree with some people that don't agree with others. But I also think there's an energetic alignment of the food, right? Like you look at so many different regions of the world and they feel that way. Like they feel like, um, you know, okay, certain areas of the world might find certain foods to be more sacred or might have more energetic value to them. And that's not literally just I eat this and it gives me energy, but like does this food actually resonate with me? And so there's a lot more of that, which, believe it or not, is controversial because you're getting into kind of woo woo land a little bit. But I feel that I'm just like, there's certain foods that just like don't click with me, that I just feel not right when I eat them. Right. Like for example, like I don't feel particularly great when I eat pork. There's something up with pork that just doesn't resonate with me.
Have you ever tried muscle testing? Like
Mm-mm.
like like holding your fingers together. This is something that I would have thought is
Oh, I've
bullshit,
seen some of that stuff, like
a
where you
while
like,
ago. I
um,
do it sometimes, and I'm like, I think there's something to this, man. Like, there's like if I pick up a certain apple, like a pesticide-ridden kind
yep,
of plastic, shiny, nonsensical one, and I'll just explore, seeing what it's like to do like they have different versions of it.
yep,
You can like hold your arm up and do like a bicep thing, or do like pull your fingers apart.
yep.
I personally notice, I'm not suggesting,
No,
that
it's
this is any kind of scientifically backed thing or it's a real thing or whatever it is. Maybe it is, maybe it is. But to me, intuitively, it does make sense that when I think about an idea that makes me feel strong, makes me feel powered, makes me feel like in alignment with myself, compared to when I think about an idea that feels like there's dissonance, it's like, oh, it's like a resistance, like, oh, that's gross, I don't like that. It would make sense that I would probably create a little bit more access to energy when I'm putting myself into a place of resonance and alignment. And so I think a similar thing, if you're holding some type of food that is just, your body knows somatically, you just know this is garbage. I would think that it could create some type of effect like that. I was just curious if you've ever like just experimented with that, because it's kind of an interesting
yeah.
thing.
No, I have. I've had like I've done some like bioresonance stuff and like also kind of seen that like there's even like supplements that you can do it with where you like feel like is this, and it's not a
Yeah,
matter of like I think people get the wrong idea with that it's not a matter of like, hey, is there like some conduction of electricity or like EMF relationship, and there could actually be for sure, but
there could be.
that's that's
I
not.
think it's just a feeling.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah,
when you
it's
feel
your
good, you're strong. When you don't feel good, you're not as strong.
well,
It's
I
like,
mean, if you want to
it's
get
simple.
what placebo, I mean, even the placebo effect is a pretty accurate, what is it, 34% or whatever. I mean, it's like
I thought it
the
was higher than
reason
that, but
is,
yeah.
yeah. So the placebo is highly predictable. Like the placebo effect is highly predictable. I can't remember exactly what percentage it is. I want to say it's either 26 or 34%. Like it's like it's down to a percentage. Like it's predictable that someone's going to
I
have
just
X.
I just had Ellen Langer on the podcast last week. She's a Harvard professor. She wrote the book Counterclockwise. She's the first female tenured professor in Harvard. One of the studies, she's done a lot of different interesting research, but one of the studies that she did was around wound healing, and they had people. They had various different like cuts that they created, and they had one group had normal time, another group had a clock that was moving faster than normal, and another group had a clock that was moving slower than normal. And they found, based off of the research that Ellen mentioned on the podcast and I read in her book, they found that the group that was in the room with the clock that was fast forward, that was expedited, that was moving faster than typical, their biology actually ran in suit with that and healed faster. Which is kind of an interesting thing. She's got a ton of different studies like that, where it's like our perception physically or physiologically creates change, in real time within ourselves. Very interesting. Anyway, so it wouldn't be that far fetched for me to have like the belief of this is healthy, makes me feel good, that it could, suddenly make you have more access to, motor unit recruitment. Like, it didn't sound
Totally,
that
dude.
wild to me.
Do you know that guy, Bill Maeda on Instagram? He's like
Yeah, I love Bill. I message him semi regularly. We've been talking about
yeah,
the podcast because I lived in Hawaii for a while. So
yeah.
yeah,
I just got
yeah.
back 2 days ago from Oahu. I was hanging out with him and filming with him, and
Nice. Yeah, he's sweetie.
very like cool spiritual dude. And like, but what was cool, like when I was talking to him about his diet, he was like, "Yeah, you know what I do, man." He's like, "When I eat something, I can first of all tell if it's something that's going to work for me or not, just by being around that food. He's like, and then when I eat it, I envision it as like a burning hot sun in my stomach that's just giving me energy. And that's how it works, man. And like, that's just what he said. He's just like, because he doesn't have like a nutritional background. He's just like, that's just how it works, man. Like, I just eat this food and like, it's the right food. And then it gives me energy. And like, I have this burning hot glow and that just burns hot. And then when that needs to burn again, I fill it up again. And it was like, it was so simple and matter of fact, but this is just how he's done it his whole life. And he also, eats to like 80% satiety, and he just eats at total random. Like, he just will be like, sometimes I'll have one meal a day. Sometimes I won't eat at all. Sometimes I'll have four. Sometimes I'll have 5,000 calories. He's like, it's complete random. He's like, because I just go based on like what that fire in my belly is telling me to give me energy. And I'm like, that's so cool that you can be so in tune and so aware of that. Because no matter how much you'd want to nitpick that, if you were very science minded, like, you can't deny the fact that he's uh, putting himself in a spot where he's like hyper aware, and most people could probably stand to be hyper aware like that. And if they were raising their level of awareness to that degree, probably wouldn't have the same obesity problem that we have now. So
Yeah.
either way, it's a win.
Yeah. And that's like again, more of the whole psychosomatic stuff. There's David Spiegel on here as well, who he's like, I think he's considered like the father of hypnosis or something like that. And his dad was like another kind of like one of like the godfathers of the whole thing. But um, one of the studies that he suggested in our conversation was around leptin and ghrelin, and people could augment their production of leptin and ghrelin, kind of like hunger hormones or satiety hormones, based off of just being hypnotized as though they're eating fake food, or as though they're eating food. And so you can just go through the visualization, the hypnotic state of eating, air food, and physiologically you're going to have a like the same response or a similar response as though you're eating a hoagie. And so again, it's not that surprising to me that you could visualize warmth within your abdomen, or a sun or energy or any of that, and that actually having physiological impact. It's not actually that far fetched if you want to go down a scientific perspective.
It's kind of interesting. It's almost like when you get like bodybuilders that start tracking, or anybody that all of a sudden will start tracking because their intent is to get lean or whatever it is they're doing. So suddenly they start tracking. And it's almost as though it's less about the calories and more about they believe and trust a mathematical system so much that they know that they are convinced, they know that it's going to make a change because they fully submit to and they trust. So they are now, and I say believing almost as though it's condescending, but I don't mean it that way. I promise. Like, they are believing that this is doing the trick, right? This is doing it. And they believe that it's because they're tracking every single individual calorie. And sure, that probably plays a part. But it's also just the fact that they've submitted to and they believe that I'm going to get this outcome and this is what's going to happen. And there's a certain margin of error with that, I'm sure, but it's kind of interesting. It's like, is it the tracking, or is it because like what if you were eating the exact same amount of calories, but you just never measured before, you don't realize you are, but this belief system, it's fascinating to me.
It's always a combination, I think. And whatever you think you're doing, you're probably 40% accurate in what's actually happening. And then there's like another 60% or some arbitrary percentage of like what's actually happening, and we're like children, pushing like the visual that comes to mind is like that when you're like a kid in the grocery store and you have the little child steering wheel. It's like a race car and mom's actually pushing the cart. I think that's what we're doing. I think we're like, I'm totally in control. You're like, you don't know what's happening.
Dude, I love that.
There's all this nuance to what's actually happening. And then you get the effect. So you assume that like, oh, cool, like I did that. But I think there's a lot more happening. Where do you think people are the most confused in the world of exercise and fitness, being so deeply steeped in this for the last however many, whatever, 20 odd years that you have been?
Probably because,
or maybe longer than that. I don't know how long you've actually been. How long have you been in this world? When did you like start doing?
about a decade now. Yeah. So I think I started my channel in like 2015. So, um,
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, where do you feel like there's the greatest confusion, like low hanging fruit confusion in Western culture from the exercise
I,
and
st-
fitness perspective?
I mean, I still think calories are a major source of confusion for people
Mm,
because it allows people to deny everything else, like everything else that
right.
is so important. Everything that, you know, calories will, and again, this comes from someone that I'm not denying them. Like they are a unit of heat measure, sure, like definitely. But it's like it also denies like the emotional aspect. It denies the sheer mental aspect. It divides the or denies the nutrient quality aspect. It's there's so many other factors. So I still think that like day in and day out, when we have all these different randomized controlled trials that come out that find that like weight loss ends up like being roughly the same across the board in all kinds of different diets and this and that, it just confuses people more because it leads us to think that it's only calories and not anything else matters, and forgetting the major important elements like relationships and emotional health and whatnot. So when you have like I don't think any more like major weight loss studies really need to be done. Like I don't know if that's helping anything, because the more weight loss studies we have, seems like we're just getting fatter and fatter. Like I so something doesn't add up. So for such a mathematically minded approach of looking at calories as the problem, then why can't we also recognize that like the more that we talk about that, the less it's working? So that seems like a pretty simple mathematical equation too. It's like we have each year we have more weight loss studies than the year before, yet we have more people overweight than the year before.
What would be the next deeper, more core foundational components to weight loss then? If you feel like calorie were a little bit astray with our hyper fixation on calories.
They're astray, but I also don't. I also think that they're put in place in a way that it's a simple place for people to understand it, right? I get the understanding, I get the mass appeal of being able to talk about it like that because um, you get in the weeds really quick otherwise. So like, and it's not like wrong per se. It's just there's just a lot more to it than that. That's not a question that I have an answer to because I think if I had the answer, then people much smarter than me would have the answer. Because I think a lot of it comes down to something that's really hard to correct, and that's just where we are in terms of our actual relationship and disconnect with food, right? Because food is always going to be like food should be celebrated. Food should be celebrated. Like it's what it's meant to be. Like it's meant to be, should be a celebratory act like when we get to eat. And unfortunately, like just like any drug, we become hooked on that and we want to celebrate. We find a reason to celebrate. So like how can you take that away? Like so that's why it's so hard to talk about food because you're just like we are biologically, it is ingrained in our biology and who we are as people to celebrate energy and food and the sun and all these things. So like the moment that that becomes abundant, you have to chase more of it to get the same biological result in terms of celebration, if that makes sense. So I just don't see how like without really changing people's like, almost neuroplasticity to like become more aware of that, it can really change. So it's a much more emotional question, a much more emotional answer that's beyond my pay grade that I can really answer. But I hope that that makes a little bit of sense.
I don't think it's that far beyond your pay grade. I feel like you're probably playing coy more. I feel like you have like a deeper sense of like if a person is feeling emotionally dysregulated and they're feeling stressed out and they're in a chronic state of some level of sympathetic fight flight type space, it would make sense at some level perhaps for their body to be more greedy with holding on to fat cells, for example, of saying like, okay, like winter is coming, I need to prepare myself, so we're going to boost ourselves up with the stress hormones. We're going to kind of chronically place ourselves into this place, which eventually would lead to various different iterations of fatigue. And, and now your body's in like this kind of chronically struggling state just to hold on. And if you are at in a chronic level in this place of fight flight that you've never really actually been able to address because you've never really been able to like delve into those aspects within yourself to really understand yourself, understand, why am I chronically bracing? Why am I chronically, right now, people listening to this, take a check and see if you are clenching your butt. There's a good chance your butthole is clenched right now. You're relax, oh shit, I'll be damned, my butthole is clenched right now. Why are you clenching your damn butthole all day? And that's just one of the many sphincters throughout your entire digestive system, your entire enteric nervous system. And so I think if a person can come into a place of ease within themselves, it would just intuitively, inherently make sense and scientifically make sense that systems would probably function more effectively.
Traumas are not just, they're pretty epigenetic, so you have childhood traumas, you have these things, and we also generationally, you think about maybe our parents' generation and how they were raised, and how there's never been that whole generation was kind of trained to just bottle up their emotions, really. So, the trickle down effect of that, in not being and this stuff is, deeply ingrained in our subconscious, as you well know. And that great book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's just dude, it's so, it's not weird stuff. It's actually very easy to demonstrate. So when you take a look at our parents and how we probably grew up and how they probably grew up in situations where it was awkward to express love. It was really awkward and considered narcissistic to have self-love. So and the overuse of the term narcissist too, I feel like it has people afraid to love themselves, because they feel like if they love themselves, they're a narcissist. And there is a huge difference between, forgiving yourself, loving yourself, and having, and those kind of liberations are so critical. And so I see all day long, this stuff that is the name calling of and throwing narcissist around like crazy is just it's killing an entire group of people, and especially men, because men get called narcissists a lot. And I'm not saying this because I get called a narcissist. I honestly don't. Oh, a lot of times it's people just having to protect themselves because of what maybe what they've experienced, and that's just another state of the problem. And calling someone that and putting them in that, yes, there are assholes. Yes, absolutely there are assholes. But can we just call a spade a spade? And if someone's an asshole, just maybe they're an asshole, but they're not necessarily a true definition of a narcissist. Point is that it was awkward for me growing up to love myself. I was candidly kind of taught that I should always belittle myself and be somewhat self-deprecating, because that's what humility and being humble is. No, found that humble is actually quite different. Humble is a almost meek, almost a calm strength. That's totally different. So, but now we've got, okay, our generation, obviously on track to be a very obese generation, and our younger generation, I don't know what's going to, I think now some of the damage is done epigenetically, because it might take generations for that to kind of course correct, because the younger generation is quite interesting in how they're willing to talk about their emotions. They're willing to do these things, but in somewhat unhealthy ways. So I guess my point with all of that is that we carry these things that make us maybe epigenetically more prone to store fat, but also to self-medicate with food. And self-medicating is so easy to have happen without ever realizing it's happening.
Yeah, we're carrying weight that we don't want to be holding on to. But there's a term, male normative alexithymia, which is alexithymia means it's an inability to express your emotional state into words. So you're almost trapped or confined in these emotional sensations because you haven't figured out a way to be able to actually express them out and be seen and heard in those things. So you just hold on to them. There's nowhere for them to go. And most people, myself included, you, anybody listening to this, we're holding on to some level of shit that we probably would prefer not to. And a lot of the avoidant behaviors that we might have, or addictive behaviors that we might have, or various different things, I think oftentimes is a way of us like escaping actually experiencing some of those sensations. And I wonder from your perspective, what would happen to a body as it starts to become more um, clear, within itself, or more like liberated within itself, or more in a place of like, I actually have nothing to forgive within myself. There's no part of judgment within myself. I actually am like, pretty clear to give and receive love. I wonder what that body ends up, how that body ends up expressing from a like a physiological level.
I mean, you can see it in at least cultured cells, like when exposed to different like energies and different environments, and like how they react, and like even down to neuroplasticity, even down to like cell membrane fluidity. Like, so we know in vitro that just the energetic value of something can change how a cell reacts. So that's in a petri dish. Now imagine if you had it happening throughout the entire orchestra of your body. You think about the inability to sort of articulate your emotions, and you go back. I don't know. I'm going to speculate here, but you go back, thousands of years, and mankind would probably express emotions through various grunts and noises and things that would probably be weirdly like socially unacceptable now. So like even releases, right? Like maybe there, so you can't always put these things into words, but what about before there were words? So like before there was like distinct language, and there was definitely no articulation. In a way, we have bridled our ability to articulate by putting the confines of articulation into a vocabulary. Because if there's not a word to express it, then it doesn't exist. So, like, what if we erased all of that for a minute and we would express our emotions in a different way? I mean, it's like, have we become captive? Just like I talk about being audience captured by my audience, and that's a small scale, but we've become captive even down to our vocabulary, right? So it's an inability to kind of express that. We almost have to just, sometimes I just want to go to the fucking top of a mountain and scream, but that would
Hmm.
be weird. So I don't. Like,
Oh, you
but
gotta
now I
do
might.
it. That's not weird, bro. Dude, I'll fucking go scream with you. There's a quote that you probably heard from William Osler, Sir William Osler, and he's old physician. I think he's considered like the, I don't know, father of something medicine, something big deal. But the organs weep the tears the eyes refuse to shed. You ever heard that before?
No, I haven't actually.
I like that one. And I think that that's like the organs weep the tears the eyes refuse to shed. I think that you could also probably say that with a lot of uh, iterations of dis-ease that arise in the body. And I think that the body, when you have that sensation, that's like when you feel so good when you're in love. Suddenly everything's good. You're light, you're stronger, you're focused. It's just like everything changes because suddenly some other person out there somewhere opened up or catalyzed a space within yourself, which you had access to all along. They're just catalyzing that space within yourself to like feel love. And suddenly just everything is good. Your diet's better, you just give a shit. It's like we have access to that all the time, but I think most of us, for the most part, we live in a world that is predisposing us to chronic stress, chronic comparison. We're exposing ourselves to non-native blue lights, flickering blue lights that are stressful, or putting our eyes into screen that are. I mean, people have talked about this in so many different ways, but we're putting our eyes into screens that are closing our vision. It's contracting the ciliary muscles around the eyes. It's actually putting us, activating our autonomic nervous system, be a little bit more teed up, sympathetic. We're inside of a house, breathing deionized air conditioned air. We're like we look around, we can't see behind the walls. Like we're not meant for that. That's like a really new novel experience, and we're bottled the freak up. And we want to go to a mountain and scream, man. And if we don't do it, I think things start to go haywire.
Dude, that's a, not to mention just a, yeah, flat out energy release. I mean, it's like, you look at even just the yin and yang style stuff. It's like I don't think a lot of people are kind of in balance with that um, proper energy flow, but it also happens with, I think, with nutrition in a way that we can't really describe, or we just don't have ways to describe it yet. Like I'm sure I'm certain of it, that there are foods that are more energy blocking than energy flowing. But I think that the body is so highly adaptable, and we forget how powerful epigenetics are, because really I shouldn't say we forget. I think we're just unaware of it, because epigenetics are somewhat of a newer thing, right? I mean, obviously you've got like amazing scientists that have done amazing work there, but I think one of the people that really brought a lot of it to light, to the mainstream, at least in terms of that term, is Bruce Lipton, of course. You
Yeah,
know,
he's been on the podcast as
yeah,
well.
he's awesome. He's such an awesome guy,
Yeah.
and it's just, so he kind of brought it to the surface. But then, I mean, as we've learned more and more about this, it's just like, damn, I have become less and less convinced that it's our genetics, and more convinced that it's our epigenetics. And
Yeah,
um,
it's definitely
it's,
both, but it's more epi than I think what people would like to believe.
yeah, like I'm
Because
inclined
if
to
it's
think
more
it's,
epi, it means you're in a state of empowerment, which means you're in a state of responsibility,
yes, yes.
which maybe some people would prefer to forego. You know,
Yeah, I mean,
like I didn't
that's
do
so
this.
liberating to me, though. Like, it's just, to me, I see that
Of
as,
course,
yeah,
your responsibility is the best.
yeah, yeah. It's and you think about how people, even as like, I can't remember the book, but been some interesting stuff that's come out recently just on epigenetics and traumas, and like how even epigenetic traumas can be passed down genetically. So now it's like you have a transition of epigenetic changes that are solidified into genetic changes passed on. So it's like, this is, I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to say it just loosely. I mean, just to make it somewhat colloquial and just simple. But, it's like the mom that's hyper stressed and has all these issues that have come up in her life, and maybe things that have happened to her. Those epigenetic changes to those traumas are going to come through as potential genetic changes in the offspring. Not
They
to
showed that with
mention,
the Dutch hunger winter. You ever
yeah,
heard of that?
yeah,
The women that were pregnant during that time frame, the kids were much more stingy with holding on to calories or on to fat. And I
yep,
think there was other effects as well. But they came out and they're like, oh shit, there's no food around.
yep,
So any food I get, we're gonna hold on to that stuff. So it was actually like a
yeah.
genetic change based off of the exposure that these women had to the Dutch hunger winter.
Exactly, man. And then you couple that with the additional epigenetic effects on top of that, right? So then now you've just compounded it. So now you've got genetic effects, and then those people are going to have their own epigenetic effects, which are going to have their next lineage of genetic effects, and then epigenetic effects that come on top of that. Like, no wonder we're in this vicious cycle that's so almost predictable with the rate of obesity each year. It's like, okay, well, how do we stop that cycle? That's a really tough question.
How do we stop it, man? I know that you're not the guy, but I think you also are the guy in some ways as well. I think we're all the guy and girl. Like, what's your lens on how do we ameliorate?
Yeah, and if you had to ask me a year ago, I would have said everyone delete social media. But I
Yeah.
actually think that it's beyond that. I think that's not the only. I haven't seen data to show me like if things have hockey sticked more since social media or not, because social media is still in such its infancy, like as far as like research is concerned. Like, we don't have like,
Mm,
maybe like social media has really only blown up in the last maybe 10 years, really in the
yeah.
last like 6 7 years. So like that's just too new to see like what trajectory are we on.
What do you think is going to happen to the hockey stick usage of hormones? Now suddenly it's normal for every like 27-year-old spiritual bro or any version of bro that has access to $1,100 or whatever to get on a subscription to start doing testosterone replacement.
I'll tell you my biggest concern. uh, First, wouldn't it be just like a crazy storm if you got a bunch of guys like hooked on testosterone? And I say hooked because they would need it to have functioning levels of testosterone. If they went off of it, then it'd be pretty problematic. Wouldn't it be just be terrible if suddenly all that testosterone became unavailable and you've got an entire generation of men dependent on it? Like, that's my concern. Like, I don't like having to be reliant, especially reliant on a pharmaceutical. And Like, that's my concern, is like, okay, you have something that there's clearly a negative feedback loop. So, like, look, I've fucked around when I was a teenager with my own fair share of pro hormones and peptides and all kinds of shit. No, they did Superdrol. I did a lot of like the, what is it, methyl 1 test, which candidly are stronger than steroids, to be honest. Like, those things are bad. Like, they're basically worse than D-bol, right? Like, I mean, they're scheduled now, right? Or I don't know if they're scheduled, but you can't. Yeah, so I may as well just say yes, realistically. But the reason that I won't touch anything now is simply because I don't want to be dependent on it. If I wasn't going to have to be dependent on it, I probably would mess around with it. Like, honestly, like, I don't have any issues with it other than the fact that, like, I don't like putting synthetic things in, but I also consume protein powder and stuff like that. So it's like, whatever. But point is that this is something that you're really disrupting a feedback loop on. Like, you're messing up something that is going to be really problematic if you have to go off of it for an extended period of time or forever.
Do you think there'd be other implications, assuming a person just says, screw it, I'm just going to be on, TRT for the rest of my life because I'm so much more awesome when I am? Do you think there's other implications that are unseen yet? Or do you think this might be like a actual kind of pass, get out of jail free card where it's like, oh no, it's actually fine. The body takes well to exogenous hormones.
There's always that chance. But I'm inclined to think that there's no free rides. So what you borrow from tomorrow, or you borrow from tomorrow for today, so to speak. So, like, is it going to shorten your lifespan? I don't know. Like, I mean, have we had people alive long enough, like, with TRT to see if it's like,
what do you think of other stuff? Like, something that I use presently that I found actually significant benefit from is do a DHEA and pregnenolone supplement.
yeah.
And that was one of the only things that I've taken that I've been like, I noticed something from using this stuff. And what do you have any opinions or thoughts on that or anything else in kind of those realms?
Yeah. DHEA is nice because at least DHEA, I have used DHEA for sure. I don't right now. DHEA is multifaceted because it's a precursor to a lot of things, not just testosterone. So dehydroepiandrosterone or whatever. It's much better in that case because your body can use it with what it really needs, and it shouldn't elevate. It can elevate DHT, so you can get some zits and some potential hair loss from it. What's up?
What is DHT?
That's a dehydrotestosterone. So that's like the form of testosterone. That's like if someone goes on like a highly androgenic compound, or if they go on steroids, that's what would make their hair fall out or give them acne. Basically, gives them the negative side effects, right? But it's also fine. Like, I mean, DHT is DHT. It's going to happen. So as long as, and that's where your genetics and your epigenetics do play a part. Like, are you more prone to hair loss, things like that? So I think DHEA is highly promising. Like, I've known a number of women that have had good success with DHEA too, because it can regulate a lot of things. So if your DHEA pool is low, then I think you have a benefit to it. But to answer kind of your question, like, I do think that pregnenolone, I'm not savvy on enough. I mean, I know it's also a precursor. So I don't know enough to really make an educated comment, but I know that DHEA and pregnenolone go really well together, because they essentially can kind of complete a cycle with each other. And I know with DHEA, like, there's the 7 keto form of DHEA, which is supposed to kind of help protect you a little bit more from like the DHT conversion. Which most on the market now are like a 7. It's called 7 keto DHEA, not keto like the diet, but it's called the 7 keto. I can't remember the full name of it. If you could for sure have access to synthetic testosterone for the rest of your life, and that was a non-issue, is it pulling away from something else? Probably, but is it to any measurable degree? Like, if you take testosterone and it makes you a better person, and it makes you a better dad, and it makes you a better husband, and it makes you a better, and it doesn't change your mind state to a point that you're, then I don't really see a downside. But I also just don't know, because, like, how long has testosterone been around? like, and used in a replacement fashion, not that long. Testosterone, historically was used by bodybuilders and blasted and then time off and blasted and time off. And then eventually those bodybuilders stop, or maybe they end up on TRT. It depends on the generation of bodybuilders. And like, you're not seeing bodybuilders hitting 100 years old, but you're also not seeing them all croaking at 55 either. So I'm taking like a really objective look at it and thinking that like it probably does take some years off your life. But could you make the argument that having exogenous testosterone and putting on additional muscle mass, and even if you were to come off the testosterone and you retained that muscle mass and you were able to keep tension on the muscles and you were to keep protein intake high and maintain that muscle, would you have like a positive metabolic outcome from it? Probably. I mean, I actually, as much as like I don't like how much I fucked up my hormones by messing around with stuff when I was, a teenager and when I was 18, 19, I mean, yeah, I ended up super overweight as a result of that stuff because I had no idea what I was doing. I came off the stuff, and the point is that, but I still am glad that I did, because I put on a lot of muscle that I've been able to maintain for, 20 years without touching anything. Right. So it's like, that is important when it comes. So I think that I got a metabolic benefit from, a year or two of kind of I don't even want to call it stupidity, but just being naive. Right.
Yeah.
So
is there any other standout kind of supplements or foods or anything of the sort that you would recommend someone who's looking to regulate their hormones, and particularly, in the direction of quote unquote gains?
taurine is pretty freaking awesome when it comes down to like just recovery. And I know we see it a little bit in energy drinks and stuff, but I'm talking like, 3 to 6 grams of taurine a few times per week on your heavy training days. Like, pretty remarkable improvements in time to exhaustion, in overall recovery. That's a big one for me. Then there's the obvious creatine, but that doesn't even really need to, that's not like anything, crazy. As far as like getting into, well, we could talk peptide world for a minute. I think that I'm hugely bullish. I mean, I guess technically I'm not, well, I wouldn't consider myself natural anyway, just given my experience with pro hormones and stuff. I'm fair enough to say that, but I also have used enough peptides over the years to definitely not call myself like a natural. But peptides, I do think technically are in a different category, but for the blanket statement, WADA bans them. So then technically, yeah. But ones that I've talked about a lot, BPC 157, TB 500, remarkable compounds.
Can you define what a peptide is for folks?
Yeah. So I mean, peptides are
exactly?
basically a series of like peptide bonds, which are like basically strings of aminos in certain thousands of different sequences. And that's what's kind of interesting is like you look at amino acids and you're like, okay, I take a scoop of amino acids, it's going to be deaminated and broken down into a bunch of amino acids that are going to go do something and build different things in the body. So it doesn't matter as long as I have enough amino acids in me. But then you look at things like peptides, which are very clearly effective and very clearly work. Those are sequences of amino acids that you're just typically injecting. And they have an entirely different effect as a signaling molecule because they are a specific sequence of amino acids. So like if I were to say, here's a bucket of amino acids to put it in your body, someone could make the argument and say, well, that's going to build this peptide and that peptide and this peptide. Well, no, only if it has an impetus to. Like, why would the body that would seem highly inefficient to just create every single thing at random just because there's supply, right? If there's no demand. But when you look at like peptides, you're basically injecting a sequence of it. So it's going to stimulate sometimes more production of it, but also just a signaling response. So like in the case of like BPC 157, heavily used in injury repair because its signal that it triggers the body to do is generally angiogenesis, creating more vasculature, more blood flow to an area, more capillaries like being built in an area. So if you have an injury, you're going to get more blood flow and ultimately potentially better recovery. TB 500, very similar, also works on a lot of inflammatory pathways. So there's peptide upon peptide upon peptide upon peptide coming out. all doing different things. MOTS-C for like mitochondrial health and all that. There's really cool stuff. But again, it kind of does, like, I think it's a safer bet in a lot of ways than hormones. That's my opinion, just because like hormones are very, very fragile. Like peptides are working on like one singular axis that the body could kind of override in some ways. With hormones, synthetic hormones, you're dealing with something where you're moving a lot of different levers without a counterbalance. So but the scary thing about peptides is that they're generally not regulated, which is good and bad, right? Because when you're talking about safety, that is something that you want to be aware of. Like so if people, like, you can buy peptides from like random places, there's no guarantee you're getting what you ordered, right? So my recommendation is, yeah, I mean, do talk to a doctor that can at least write you a script and do it from like a compounding pharmacy and do it like, so there's a level of at least kind of purity, right? So I'm still cautious with peptides for that reason, because I'm not just willing to put anything and everything in my body. But I have had tremendous results with BPC 157 and TB 500. Like, made a big difference in some really nagging injuries and just overall recovery for sure.
What about other factors such as resistance training, access, like sunlight exposure? What is vitamin D doing to us, or a lack of vitamin D doing to us? Is it okay if you are inside a house all day long taking a vitamin D supplement and you're not actually getting that from the sun? So those are two different questions, all tied to hormone regulation. I'd like to touch on vitamin D and our relationship to sunlight.
Yeah.
And if that ties into hormone regulation as well, which obviously it does, I'd be curious your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, man. I think this, I mean, sunlight trumps all for sure. I think that
Yeah.
the concern I have with vitamin D is that, this is still generally a synthetic form of vitamin D that is, again, one lever in an orchestra of, it's one instrument in an orchestra, right? So it's like, if you're deficient in vitamin D, I think getting vitamin D ups with a synthetic compound probably makes some sense. Like, take some vitamin D. But please don't forget the fact that like our vitamin D is low for a reason. And there's also people that get a lot of sunlight that still have low levels of vitamin D. And when you look at the entire sort of chain that happens, I mean, holy cow, man, like magnesium, copper, all these things involved in like how vitamin D is ultimately, converted into the 25 hydroxy vitamin D that is commonly known as D3, like when it's converted in your body. Also, when you take it synthetically in a supplement form, you're getting a really quick, rapid absorption of it. When you get it from the sun, it takes like 13 hours or something, 13 or 14 hours to ultimately convert it, which means you're getting a steady stream consistently, a kind of low dose, sustained release vitamin D when you go out in the sun. That's going to continue to kind of sustain for a while. I'm a fan of cod liver oil, not to, because you've got vitamin A, vitamin D, you've got omega-3s, and you've got like pro-resolving mediators that kind of help balance. The problem is so you don't need much though. Like, I recommend taking cod liver oil and see, like, in a low dose, like just to kind of see what, maybe just, a couple teaspoons or a couple capsules, like just to kind of see where you end up with your vitamin D levels there before, just because you don't want to go too high with cod liver oil, because vitamin A toxicity is also real. Vitamin D is a hormone, and it is not just a small hormone. It is a very important, prominent hormone in our body. So I make enemies left and right because I'm not the biggest fan of taking vitamin D supplements.
Who would need to take a vitamin D supplement? What are some people that are, barring they live in a place where they just don't have access to the sun, i.e., jail or something? Like, is there certain genetic dispositions or people that might not be biologically, I don't know, oriented towards being able to process vitamin D, where that's like, oh no, you guys actually need this? And how common is that?
Yeah. I don't know how common it is, but, like, obviously African American people usually need more, because they're, yeah. So it's, you're looking at any kind of situation, like even like if you're incarcerated, I mean, yeah, I would definitely be taking it. Like, there's a certain level, like at what point is having exceptionally low levels of sunlight and vitamin D worse or better than taking a vitamin D supplement? Like I think people are settling in and understanding that like you shouldn't just take vitamin D supplements to take a vitamin D supplement. When I have taken it in the past, first of all, always take it with K2, preferably like the MK7 form, just because it helps kind of consolidate and allocate where it goes better. But dose it a little bit based on your sunlight exposure. Like don't
Exactly.
like so
It's a
if you're
subtle.
like, hey, I wasn't in the sun much today. All right, cool. Take a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah.
I feel like we could do that with everything. Like if we had, if we were open to having a decent, more, I don't know, intimate relationship with our nutrition and our movement and our bodies, our biology. I feel like most systems would do better if we weren't so structured and rigid and regimented with what we're doing. Like such as the vitamin D. I think that's one of those things where it's like for a span of 3 months you're in the sun a lot, great, no problem. And then for a week, you weren't, start supplementing that and kind of oscillating within that. Is there any other, and we'll wrap up here in a minute, is there any other supplements that you would recommend people actually just in this present state of the world with a lack of certain vitamins or minerals in the soil composition, etc., we're just not really able to get, except for maybe some, abstract places that we don't live? Is there any supplements that we just need to be taking as Western culture human beings at this point?
I can't think of a person on earth that wouldn't benefit from taking magnesium.
Yeah, that's what I figured you were going to say.
Yeah. I mean, multiple different forms, and different forms resonate with different people. It's kind of funny because like 5 years ago, I couldn't handle magnesium glycinate. Like it just wrecked my stomach. So I always took like a sustained release. And I recently tried magnesium glycinate again, and I tolerate it like a champ. And now that's my favorite. So I think that different, seasons of our life probably bring different things, and especially digestively, because magnesium, that's the one thing that can be iffy for people is take the wrong kind. And so I would recommend like a dimagnesium malate or one that's bound to a malic acid. Magnesium glycinate is probably my next favorite. Um, some of the other ones like magnesium threonate, things like that, the research is kind of dodgy on if it does anything different than other magnesium. So I wouldn't like go out and spend the extra money necessarily on magnesium threonate unless you really feel something different from it. It's supposed to cross the blood-brain barrier and be more active in the brain, help you be a more calmer and think clearer. I haven't really noticed that, but I've also talked to people that are like, no, man, I feel big time. So I think that's a really big one. I feel like the occasional fish oil dosing, but I don't think that it needs to be a daily thing. I think we're starting to see now that like a low omega-3 index is not good. Like a low omega-3 index can be literally worse than smoking, statistically speaking. But I also feel like a lot of omega-3 also makes so much membrane fluidity in your cells that it can be catastrophic for driving up reactive oxygen species too. So use it with a little bit of caution. Also know that most omega-3s are oxidized. And this is not a plug for any brand. The only brand that I've known so far that seems to be a really good omega-3 is that it's called Wiley's Finest. And you end up having, I think they do have capsules, but I just get the straight liquid. And almost every batch that they produce, they oxidize test and omega-3 value test. So it's like you're getting that when you order it, which I appreciate it. And a big rule of thumb with omega-3s is do not buy them from Amazon, because they will sit on Amazon fulfillment shelves for a long time. So get them always fresh direct from a website. I know it takes a couple days longer, but always do that and put them in the fridge, even if they say they don't need to be refrigerated.
And imagine, make sure they're in a dark bottle,
Yeah.
and obviously refrigerated and stored in a place that it's not.
One other one that I'm a fan of, and I am going to plug them because they're good people. They are not. I'm not paid to say this or anything like that, but it's a company called Troscriptions. They're the ones that do like, yeah, they're awesome. So like I'm okay on methylene blue. Like I don't feel a ton from it. I feel a little bit, but they have that other one called Trocalm, which is badass. Like it's nicotinol GABA, so it's like a B3 bound to GABA, so it can actually cross the blood-brain barrier. Yeah, little troche you can stick.
Prescriptions stuff works.
Yeah,
I think in my experience, and they have the nicotine one as well. I think it's like
literally
is there like methylene blue with the nicotine as well?
Yeah, that's I think
Um,
that one. And then yeah, dude, I've got like a stack of it, man. Like it's the stuff
yeah,
is like it's a product that like I'm blessed in the sense that they'll send it to me when I ask for it because like not even because I talk about it, but just because I really don't talk about it much. But just because like I love this stuff, so like I just use it all the time.
yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much, man. I appreciate developing, connection, friendship. Look forward to more in person stuff. We got to go run up at top of a mountain, do some screaming.
I
I
will.
think that's
Sounds good to
next.
me.
Maybe we'll record it. We'll film it. Carry some rocks from our
Yeah.
shoulders, Cameron Hanes style.
Hell yeah, man.
It's coming soon. People, I guess. You're not hard to find on the internet. You got
No,
bajillion
I'm pretty easy to find. So.
subscribers on your YouTube channel, Thomas DeLauer. Is there any place to point people? Be ideal to point people from here if you want to
Yeah,
go
man,
deeper into your
just
stuff.
at Thomas DeLauer on all handles, so it makes it pretty easy.
All right, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, man.
Look forward to doing the mountain mission, and thank you all for tuning in. That's it. That's all. I'll see you next week.